Welcome back to the channel. Down at the junkyard, grabbing a bunch of stuff for the front subframe and the rear subframe. So on the rear subframe, how I think I'm going to have to align everything is from the differentials. So there isn't much that's the same, and mounting points on the Trackhawk versus Charger subframes, there isn't much the same either. So the only way I thought that it'd be very easy or very consistent, because the wheel opening is going to be the same as where the axle is. So all the suspension geometry is off of the axles, and you know, it just kind of goes outwards. So what I'm going to do is, I have the axles here. I was taking the axle apart. This axle is already bad, but I'm going to make pins that slip into the differentials, but they're the same size as this bar, so, or the same inner diameter, which is 1.5 inches. So I could have this bar here, then I could have a pin that slips in either diff that has a different shank on it. So let's go back to the machine shop, get that stuff done. Also, I'm going to make some of this tube the same length so I can make the engine mounts, and I'll have to also make one of these pins right here that is one pin instead of, you know, two pieces. So like I said in the last video, I'll put 4 bushings in here, and then I'll make a poly bushing later. Just got finished at the machine shop and I got everything that I was planning on making made, which is really great. But I also started making some stuff for the rear subframe that I wasn't planning on making. So I started making the mounts to mount the subframe to the chassis in the front and the back. I ended up using some tube and I made them 3 inches, I think they're 3 inches tall, but instead of using rubber or polyurethane, I'm gonna use solid aluminum inside of them, and then it'll be more rigid. And the Trackhawk diff and the Charger diff has nice solid bushings on the front and the back. So it'll pretty much eliminate diff noise. I won't hear the diff, but the suspension, geometry, and all of that stuff, it'll just be planted in the car, and where it is where it's gonna stay, which is really nice. I have solid bushings in most of my cars that has rubber bushings on the differentials. If the differential has a solid mounting point, then I go with polyurethane mounts in the subframe, which, you know, diff whine is just one of those things that you don't want to deal with because it's always there on D-cell and X-cell. So, and sometimes cruising. But another thing I made was on the rear subframe, I needed a way to locate the differentials, and I talked about it a little bit, and I went back and forth how I was going to do it. I was going to pretty much just ruin some axles, which this axle was already messed up, but the other axle was from the Trackhawk and it was good. Then I decided that I was just gonna make some pins. So this is a piece of DOM that I cut down to, I think 5 or 6 inches. And then, so the outside diameter is 1 3/4 inches, inside diameter is 1.5 inches. Then I made some pins that go into the diff bearings, which locates the differentials in the same exact position, which then that tube is 1.5 inches, slips into the DOM tubing, and that's how I'm going to locate both diffs, which is going to be really, really nice. And I was thinking about this, and I think I was overthinking it, but as you can see, this tube, that's the same from both differentials, which is what I need to do, because I need to have a way that I could locate both of these diffs in the same exact spot in the car, which I'm going from Charger SXT to Trackhawk, and the Trackhawk diff is a lot larger than the normal Hellcat diff. So that being said, I couldn't just put this into a Hellcat subframe because it's a totally different assembly. It has, you know, it has these nice bushings, and it just, and you know, it has this LSD traction module or LSD module to engage LSD for the rear differential, which I don't want to light on any of the display because this this is not there anymore. So, and then the rear bolt pattern for the wheels on the Trackhawk stuff is 5x127. I don't want 5x127 in the front, 5x115 in the back. It would just be stupid. So this is the best plan of attack. This will locate the SXT diff. I'll level it out, pretty much weld these tubes, and then, or weld these tubes to a common point on like a plate or something, or a table, a steel table. Then I'll level it. Then I could go and stick the Trackhawk diff, because these pins pull out, into the same spot. But before I do that, I'll get all of the body mounting locations, which are these. I'll mount the diff, pin all these into the table or whatever I'm doing, or just a fixture, and then I'll know these locations in orientation to the diff. Then I could stick the Trackhawk diff in. I could bolt the subframe to it and get all of the suspension points, all of the mounting points or mounting locations for the Trackhawk diff, and then I could make the final subframe, which sounds a lot more difficult than it is, but it still is a lot of work, especially having to do all this stuff, going from, you know, a little tiny diff to this huge Trackhawk diff, and making sure that all the suspension is going to work. And my train of thought is that if the axle path is the same, all the suspension geometry will be in the right position. So hopefully that's the correct train of thought, because if it's not, then, I mean, it should be, because it centers it in the wheel well. And I was almost thinking about redoing the front subframe kind of the same way, but just going off of the front engine bracket. So that may happen, but I wanted to get these done so I could start making the rear fixture for the rear subframe. I'm kind of tag teaming the front and the rear subframes. Also on the front subframe, I got the front engine mounts, or the poly mounts. I was gonna use those ones that I got off Amazon, but they're a little bit too wimpy, so I made these. I made a pin, I used some Dom, and these are 1.5 inch inner diameter, so they fit. And then this pin I just had to make, but as you can see, it's a lot bigger than the one I had. And the reason I did that was because this plate is larger, so it's gonna pretty much go like this on the plate. But also I'm gonna run a lot of power through the car. It's gonna transfer that power to these mounts, and I'd rather have a little bit bigger mount with a lot more poly bushing than these little wimpy mounts from Amazon. So it took a little bit more time to make these, but at the end of the day, I'm not gonna have to worry about running too much power, bending something, etc. Up at the machine shop, what I ended up making was the rear solid subframe mounts. So I ran out of 3-inch bar stock, so I ordered some more, but I made all the bases so I could get all this lined up with the stock Charger subframe and make the rear subframe. So as you can see on the bottom, it has a recessed hole, so the bolt sits nice and flush, but all the tops are just flat. But it was pretty simple. So I made these pieces, I made those pieces. It was kind of a time-consuming process. I also made some shims for the upper control arms. So I'm using adjustable Black Ops AutoWorks upper billet control arms. So these are a really nice option if you want something adjustable on a Trackhawk. I also have all their rear arms. So most likely, you know, that is for the front, but I have all the rear adjustable arms for the rear subframe, which will work as well, and they're just as good of quality. But I dropped all the stuff off to make the engine mounts, so that's getting welded up. I made the longer sleeves, as you guys saw, and all that stuff. So we should have those done. Should be able to get the top part of the subframe. Something I thought about on the subframe, I lined it up pretty well, but I don't really have a concern, but I don't want to have to redo it again. So what I'm going to do is, once the Durango comes, I'm going to pull the Durango subframe out. I'm not going to chop it up. All I'm going to do is I'm going to leave the block in here. So I'm going to put this on a plate. So instead of being connected to the base of this subframe, I'm going to put it on a plate down here in the center so I can pull this subframe off of it. And then I'll be able to put the Durango subframe in, go off of the engine brackets, bolt the subframe in, then I'll locate the steering rack bushings on both sides, and also I'll probably pull a few of these up with the diff mounting, just so I can get everything 100% lined up. I probably should have done that in the first place, but I really didn't think about it until, you know, seeing this and starting to do this and build the subframe. And I was just like, well, I don't want to get in a situation where I weld all this together, make a subframe, and then the control arms aren't in the correct position. This way I know that the control arms will be in the exact position in the steering rack as the engine sits in the car, which I'm basing all that off of axles and stuff like that, where it sits underneath the engine, etc. So, I don't want to get into the situation where I make all this for the front subframe. The rear subframe, I'm doing the same exact way. So on the rear subframe, like I showed you guys, I made those pins for the diffs, and the pins for the diffs are going to locate the subframes, and then I'll just pretty much do the Charger one first, then put the Trackhawk one on there, and we'll be good to go. And all I have to do with the Trackhawk one is get all of the suspension pickup points. So that'll be really, really simple, which will be nice. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to start messing with the subframe and pretty much just get it over here. I brought a big metal table, and I could set the subframe on it, and I'll probably make a fixture on top of this table, which I'll just make the fixture out of some tubing, because it seems like I have a few people contacting me about making their Hellcats all-wheel drive. So I'm going to make a fixture, because I'm most likely going to be producing the subframes. So it will be pretty much a kit. But I have a few people that want me to do it, and I'll, have this nice tranny cross member and, the nice subframes, which will be a lot lighter than the factory subframes. And they'll have solid bushings. I might go to poly depending on how much road noise there is, just because all the cars that I've had solid bushings in don't have 315-inch wide tires on on the rear. So we'll figure that out. But yeah, let's get this subframe up there and start figuring out how I'm going to make the fixture table, or make the fixture, so we can start producing the subframes. I was able to start making the fixture for the rear subframe. I thought I was going to get a little bit further, but I have the back two subframe mounts connected and in place. Now what I need to do, I actually need to go home and get a level. So I will continue this in the next video, but I want to make sure all this is level going this way and that way, just so when I put everything together that I don't have any issues with. It shouldn't matter, because it's just going off of the base plates, but I would rather have it level. So what I'm going to do is pretty much the same thing up here, and then I'm going to connect them. Then I'm going to stick the diff in, and I'm going to do some bars coming across to pick up those pins that I made, and then I'll put a front pin for the yoke, or what's it called? The input shaft for the drive shaft on the differential. So we will get all this stuff figured out in the next video and start making, or maybe even get everything tacked up on the new rear subframe, which I'm going to be very excited about because it's going to be very light compared to either one of these. The Trackhawk rear subframe is very, very heavy. Also, another thing that I'm going to be very happy about, I'm not sure how much road noise it's going to make, but these solid rear subframe mounts, I've had solid rear subframe mounts in cars that don't have 315s all the way around, so hopefully it's not too bad. But the Charger has sound deadening throughout the whole car. That spray and stuff that I did, the sound deadening and heat barrier, so it should be perfectly fine. But I'm gonna end the video here. If you like these videos, make sure to click that subscribe button, throw a thumbs up, throw a comment below. As always, see you guys next time.